The sun had already slipped beneath the treetops when the parents sensed something was off. At first, it was just anxious glances at their watches. Small talk meant to hide their growing concern. A few minutes late wasn't out of the ordinary, but as the shadows stretched across the quiet country road, worry turned to fear. One after another, the parents waiting at the rural bus stop pulled out their phones, dialing neighbors, pacing restlessly, their voices tinged with panic. Where was the yellow bus? It should have arrived by now. 7 second graders had boarded it that afternoon, laughter echoing, backpacks bouncing, waving goodbye from the windows. The ride home was usually quick, barely 10 minutes. But tonight, as darkness settled in, the bus never showed up. After 30 minutes, fear spread rapidly. Truck engines started as fathers sped down back roads. Mothers called the school, their voices shaking. Police were alerted, deputies dispatched. When the first patrol car reached the empty stretch between the school and the neighborhood, a grim realization set in. The bus wasn't just delayed, it had vanished. Caleb Morris was 24 at the time, a rookie cop still learning to steady his nerves. He was among the first on the scene. He remembered the parents' faces that night more vividly than any evidence photo. The wide, frightened eyes, hands gripping photos, the desperation that turned every parent into a searcher. "Find them!" a woman cried, tears streaming down her face. He promised he would. Even as the hours dragged on, as helicopters swept their beams over the endless fields, as search dogs barked and volunteers scoured ditches with flashlights, Caleb held on to hope that the bus would be found. Maybe it had broken down. Maybe the driver had taken a wrong turn. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But when dawn broke, there was still no sign. The investigation moved quickly in those first days. State police and FBI agents flooded the area, checking every back road. Volunteers combed the woods side by side, calling the children's names until their voices were hoarse. Reporters descended, cameras flashing, headlines blaring about the missing school bus, but not a single clue turned up. No skid marks, no debris, no radio contact from the driver. The only possible lead was a set of faint tire tracks on a dirt path into the pines, but they faded less than a mile in. Search crews scoured every possible spot, but it was as if the bus had simply vanished. For the families, hope slowly faded. For Caleb, a deep sense of guilt took hold. He replayed that first night over and over, every decision, every promise he made to the parents. He'd assured them their children would return, but they never did. A decade later, the town still bore the pain like a scar that refused to heal. At the bus stop where the children should have stepped off, a small memorial stood in their place. Stuffed animals, faded by sun and rain, photos in weathered frames and fresh flowers left each year marked the spot. Drivers slowed as they passed, heads bowed in respect. Each September, the mothers gathered there, candles in hand, softly speaking the names of the 7 lost children. Some families had left, unable to stay in a place so full of sorrow. Others remained, tied by the unanswered questions that lingered. Caleb was no longer the young officer he once was. Now in his 40s, gray streaked his hair, and he moved with the weight of years. He still wore his badge, still drove the same quiet roads. But every time he neared the bus stop, his heart tightened. At his side was Diesel, a sturdy German shepherd with keen senses. Diesel was his partner now, his steady companion. The dog had no memory of that night, no burden of regret. But Caleb did, and sometimes, in the quiet hours, he found himself whispering into the darkness, as if speaking to the missing children, "I should have done more." The case had long since gone cold. Files gathered dust in storage. Theories had come and gone. An accident, an abduction, even wild stories of trafficking. None were ever proven. The driver's family insisted he was a good man, incapable of wrongdoing. But the questions never faded. Did he take a different route? Was he forced? Was he involved in something unimaginable? Life moved forward, but not completely. Every parent who put a child on a school bus in that county felt a flicker of fear. Every late bus brought a wave of anxiety. For Caleb, it wasn't just a professional loss. It was a personal wound. He had given his word to those parents, and he hadn't kept it. On a September evening 10 years later, Caleb parked near the old bus stop. The sun set just as it had that night, casting long shadows across the road. He stood by the memorial, watching the candles flicker in the breeze. The mothers gathered, voices hushed, eyes weary but still searching. Diesel pressed close to his leg, ears alert. Suddenly, the dog let out a low growl, breaking the silence. Caleb's breath caught as he looked toward the woods beyond the road, where the pines stood thick and dark. For a split second he thought he saw a flash of metal deep among the trees, something dull and hidden beneath the vines. He blinked and it was gone. But Diesel kept staring, tail rigid, nose quivering, and a chill ran through Caleb. Maybe the bus hadn't disappeared. Maybe it had just been waiting. In most towns, 10 years pass quickly. Children grow, shops change, seasons come and go. But in the small community where the bus went missing, time seemed frozen. Each year, September brought the memories back, and the air grew heavy with the weight of the past. The town wasn't just scarred by what had happened, it was shaped by it. At the old bus stop, a memorial stood that never disappeared. Teddy bears, their colors faded by rain, laminated photos cracked from years in the sun, and handmade signs pleading for answers. Some mementos had been there since the first days after the bus vanished. Others were more recent, left by strangers who'd learned about the case online or through true crime stories. The spot had become a destination for those drawn to the chill of an unsolved mystery. But for the mothers, it was more than a memorial. It was a lifeline to the children they'd lost, the only place they could still feel close to them. On the 10th anniversary, they gathered once more, candles flickering as dusk settled in. Some women leaned on each other for support. Others hugged photographs to their hearts. They whispered the children's names as if afraid the breeze might steal them away. Caleb Morris stood apart from the group, his uniform a silent reminder that the case still carried the weight of official failure. Diesel stayed close by, ears alert as the quiet voices drifted across the field. Caleb wasn't there to give speeches or offer empty reassurances. He'd done that before, and the memory haunted him still. He could recall the faces from that night as clearly as if it were yesterday. Mothers collapsing at sunrise when the bus didn't come. Fathers slamming their fists on truck hoods. A grandmother gripping her rosary so tightly the cross left marks on her hand. He had promised them answers, but all he'd given was silence. Now, at 44, Caleb looked older than his years. Gray streaked his hair, and lines marked his face. Not just from the sun, but from regret. Diesel pressed against him, grounding him when the memories became too much. The town itself bore invisible wounds that never healed. The elementary school struggled for years, its enrollment shrinking as families left, unwilling to raise children in a place haunted by so many questions. Businesses along Main Street never recovered from the loss. People from outside called it that bus town, as if the mystery was all it would ever be remembered for. Some locals held on to hope long after it made sense. A few mothers believed their children might still be alive somewhere, taken perhaps, but not lost forever. They scoured the internet for photos of teenagers who resembled their kids, sending tips to the FBI that never led anywhere. Others bore their grief in silence, never speaking of it at all. Rumors became the only thing left to feed the imagination. Some said the bus had slipped into a hidden ravine, still undiscovered. Others whispered about a trafficking ring, a thought that made parents sick with dread. The darkest theory, spoken only in whispers, suggested someone from the community itself was behind it. After all, the bus couldn't have vanished on its own. Caleb hated that idea. Not because it was impossible, but because it hit too close to home. He'd grown up in this county. He knew the driver, Harold Jenkins, a man in his 50s who'd worked for the schools for years. Harold was quiet and dependable, the kind of man who went to church, coached Little League, and greeted everyone with a wave. The thought that Harold could have betrayed the children gnawed at Caleb. But Harold never came home that night either. His family insisted he would never harm those kids. Still, the fact remained. Harold disappeared with them, and no one ever proved what part he played. That night, as the candlelight vigil faded and people drifted away, Caleb noticed how empty the streets felt. It wasn't just a physical emptiness. It was the silence of a place that had stopped expecting answers. The sheriff's department had closed the case years ago, the files gathering dust in a basement cabinet, only opened when a new tip surfaced, which always led nowhere. But for Caleb, the case was never truly cold. It lived with him every day. On his night shifts, he always drove past the old bus stop, his headlights sweeping over the weathered toys and faded photos, the faces staring back at him. Each time, he told himself the same thing. There's something we missed. Diesel shifted beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. The dog's sharp gaze was fixed on the tree line again, just as it had been earlier. Caleb followed his partner's stare, but saw only the endless dark pines. Still, the memory of that faint metallic glimmer deep in the woods wouldn't leave him. "Easy, boy," Caleb murmured, though his own voice was unsteady. He knew the odds. 10 years was a long time. If the bus had been hidden nearby, surely it would have been found by now. Yet a stubborn voice inside him refused to let go. What if it wasn't an accident? What if someone had hidden the bus, buried it deep in the forest where no one would ever look? Diesel whined softly, nose twitching. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the idea that Diesel sensed nothing, or that the dog was picking up on exactly what Caleb feared. As the last candle at the memorial guttered out, Caleb climbed into his cruiser. Diesel hopped into the passenger seat. Still on edge, his gaze fixed on the shadowy woods, Caleb started the engine, the low rumble filling the quiet. He didn't head home right away. Instead, he drove a mile down the road and parked, sitting in the darkness, eyes locked on the tree line. He thought of the mothers, their hands shaking as they lit their candles. He pictured the children's faces, forever young in those school portraits, and he remembered the glint of metal, the decade of unanswered questions. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, Caleb felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the bus wasn't lost. Maybe it was just waiting to be found. The call came early Tuesday morning. Caleb was pouring his second cup of coffee. Diesel curled at his feet when the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Unit 12, we've got a report from a logging crew off County Road 17. They think they've found, they think it's a vehicle." Caleb's hand paused in midair. Finding an old car in the woods wasn't unusual. Plenty of rusted-out trucks had been left behind over the years. But the dispatcher's uncertain tone made his heart race. "What kind of vehicle?" he asked. There was a pause. "They're saying a bus." Caleb's mug hit the counter, coffee splashing onto the floor. Diesel's ears shot up, alert. When Caleb arrived at the site, the scent of pine and fresh sawdust hung in the air. The chainsaws were silent. The loggers stood in a loose circle near the edge of the woods, hard hats in hand. One of them, a burly man with a beard dusted in sawdust, stepped forward as Caleb approached. "We were clearing about 100 yards in," he said quietly, "and saw something metal in the brush. Thought it was an old trailer at first, but—" He hesitated. "It's yellow." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. His chest tightened with the weight of what he already knew. The walk through the tangled undergrowth felt endless. Diesel moved ahead, tail rigid, nose working overtime. The ground was slick from last night's rain, vines hanging thick from the trees. Then Caleb saw it, half buried under moss and kudzu, its roof crushed by years of fallen branches, was the unmistakable outline of a school bus. The paint had faded to a sickly hue, but streaks of yellow still showed through. The windows were shattered, their frames rusted and jagged. The front grille sagged, twisted into a silent scream. For a decade, the forest had hidden its secret. Caleb's mouth went dry. He heard one of the loggers whisper, "God help us." As they all stood in stunned silence, Caleb called for backup, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. Within an hour, deputies arrived, stretching crime scene tape between the trees like a pale, spectral barrier. A state investigator joined them, shaking his head in disbelief. 10 years, he murmured. And it was here all along. Caleb crouched beside the bus, his flashlight beam sweeping over the rusted metal. Diesel paced restlessly, a low growl rumbling in his chest, hackles raised. The dog had seen plenty of crime scenes, but Caleb had never seen him this agitated. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though his own heart was pounding. The doors were sealed shut with rust. Deputies brought out tools, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the woods. Every pull of the crowbar felt like opening a tomb. Caleb's hands shook as he helped brace the frame. At last, with a groan that sent birds fleeing from the treetops, the door gave way. The smell hit them first. Mold, rot, the sharp tang of water damage. But beneath it all was something older, heavier, like a breath trapped for years. Flashlights cut through the gloom inside. The bus was frozen in time. Torn seats slumped together, stuffing spilling out like entrails. Small backpacks were scattered across the floor, zippers rusted shut. Faded stickers clung to the windows. Superheroes, rainbows, names written in childish scrawl. It should have been a scene of tragedy, but there were no bones, no blood, no bodies, just emptiness. Caleb stepped inside, his boots crunching on broken glass. The silence pressed in, thicker than the darkness. He could almost hear the echoes of children's laughter, and his stomach twisted. On the dusty dashboard sat a leather wallet. With gloved hands he opened it. Inside was an ID card. Harold Jenkins, the driver. The cash was still there, untouched. None of it made sense. Diesel whined from the back of the bus. Caleb turned to see the dog scratching furiously at the floor beneath the last row of seats, growls reverberating off the metal walls. "Hold on," Caleb said, kneeling beside him. The wood was warped and splintered, as if something heavy had pressed down from below. Caleb's flashlight caught a faint scratch on the paneling, not from claws, but from something sharper, intentional. He ran his hand over it and froze. Initials carved into the wood. Faint, nearly worn away by time, but still visible. LM. Caleb's chest tightened. He remembered one of the girls, Lily Mae Carter. She would have been 17 now. His throat burned as he whispered, "She was here." Investigators called for specialized teams, but Caleb barely heard them. His ears rang with the sound of his own heartbeat. He stepped outside, gulping in the cool air, staring at the vines that had swallowed the bus whole. For 10 years, parents had lit candles, prayed for answers, and all along, the bus, their children's last refuge, had been hidden here in the woods. Caleb leaned against a tree, legs unsteady. Diesel pressed close, eyes fixed on the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. Caleb knew this was no accident. The bus hadn't simply crashed and been forgotten. It had been hidden, and whoever did it might still be out there. That night, as the forest emptied of deputies and the floodlights faded, Caleb stayed behind. He stared at the rusted shell of the bus, bathed in moonlight. He thought of the initials, the wallet, the scattered toys. Evidence of life, but not a single answer. Diesel whined softly, nuzzling his hand. Caleb stroked the dog's head, jaw set. For a decade, the town had lived in silence. Now that silence was broken, and Caleb realized, with a chill, that this was only the beginning. The crime scene lights cast long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The bus stood in the clearing like a relic from a nightmare. Deputies gathered in small groups, their voices low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever secrets still clung to the rusted frame. Caleb stepped back inside, his flashlight beam sweeping over the stripped interior. The air was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of mildew, each breath scraping his throat raw. Diesel followed close, claws tapping on the warped metal floor, every movement tense and cautious, nose twitching as he sniffed the gloom. It looked as if time had frozen the moment the bus vanished. Cracked crayons littered the floor, their colors dulled by years of grime. Stickers of stars and smiley faces peeled from the backs of seats. On one seat, a pink lunchbox decorated with faded unicorns still sat, its latch closed. Caleb crouched and pried it open with gloved hands, finding only a sandwich reduced to dust and mold. His stomach churned. What unsettled everyone most was the absence of any remains. Deputies whispered about it beyond the tape. If the bus had been here for a decade, why wasn't there a single trace of the driver or the children? No bones, no scraps of clothing, no evidence of a struggle. Just belongings left behind, as if the children had simply stepped off and disappeared into the woods. On the dashboard, Harold Jenkins's wallet still rested where Caleb had found it. The driver's ID card peered out from the cracked leather, the photo faded but still recognizable. Harold's family had always insisted he was innocent, but the fact that his things were here while he was not only deepened the mystery. Diesel whined softly, scratching again at the floor beneath the last row. Caleb followed, his flashlight catching the faint initials carved into the wood. LM. His chest tightened at the memory of Lily Mae Carter's school photo. Freckles, a wide grin, a gap where her front tooth had been. That was no accident. He pressed his palm to the worn wood. Someone had been here. Someone small, frightened, desperate enough to leave a mark. Investigators moved methodically, photographing every detail, bagging items for evidence. Caleb found himself staring at the drawings still taped to the windows. One showed a house with a tall oak tree. Another, stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Ordinary, innocent images, except now they felt like messages from another world. He remembered parents showing him those drawings in the frantic days after the bus vanished, begging him to look for clues in every scrap of paper. He'd told them it didn't work that way. But standing here now, he wondered if he'd been wrong. Maybe the children had tried to leave signs, and no one had listened. Diesel's growl broke the silence. The dog had moved to the rear emergency exit, pawing at the door. Caleb hurried over, shining his light along the seams. Rust had sealed it shut, but the dirt at the base was disturbed, looser than the rest. "There's something here," Caleb muttered. A deputy joined him, and together they pried at the panel. After several minutes of effort, The warped metal shifted, revealing a narrow gap. Caleb's flashlight found something thin and pale. He reached in with gloved fingers and pulled out a scrap of paper, brittle and torn at the edges. Words were scrawled in shaky, childish handwriting. "We wait. She said she will come." The letters wavered, as if written in fear or darkness. Caleb's hand shook as he slipped the note into an evidence bag. His chest felt hollow. The children hadn't died on the bus. They had been waiting for someone they trusted enough to follow. Outside, investigators debated whether the bus had been hidden here from the start or moved later. Caleb barely heard them. His mind spun with the note, the initials, the untouched wallet. The pieces didn't fit, but the outline of something terrible was beginning to form. He stepped outside for air. The forest felt closer now, the pines pressing in, the night alive with the hum of insects and the distant call of an owl. Diesel stayed close, ears swiveling toward the trees as if expecting something to emerge. "Whoever did this," Caleb whispered mostly to himself, "they weren't strangers." He thought of the mothers clinging to each other at the bus stop, whispering names into the darkness. He remembered the rumors that had swirled for years, men seen near the school, roads taken that shouldn't have been, and he thought of Harold Jenkins, the driver, whose belongings were here, but whose fate remained a mystery. The lead investigator finally approached, his expression grim. "We'll comb the area, expand the search grid." If the children had left the bus on foot, there should have been some sign, footprints, remains, anything. But Caleb doubted they'd simply walked away. Not willingly, not without someone leading them. He glanced back at the bus, its windows black, vines snaking over the roof like veins. For a decade, the town had lived in silence. Now, that silence had finally broken, but only in fragments. Diesel nudged Caleb's hand, grounding him. The dog's eyes were steady, but his body stayed tense, alert. He hadn't relaxed since they'd found the bus, and that told Caleb more than any report could. Something was wrong here, and whatever it wasn't finished. That night, long after the other deputies had left, Caleb remained. He sat on the hood of his cruiser, watching the moonlight glimmer on the rusted roof. He thought of Lily May's initials, the note scrawled in a child's hand. The pink lunchbox still snapped shut. The children hadn't just vanished. They'd left behind traces, carved wood, scribbled notes, small artifacts of fear and hope. Caleb set his jaw. He'd failed once, 10 years ago. He wouldn't fail again. Whatever had taken those children from the bus into the darkness, he was determined to find it. The discovery of the bus shook the town to its core. News spread like wildfire. The yellow bus that had disappeared a decade ago had been found, hidden in the woods, swallowed by vines and silence. TV crews arrived from Nashville and Atlanta, their bright lights cutting through the quiet streets. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, shoving microphones at anyone willing to speak. For a few days, the town was thrust back into the harsh spotlight of national attention. But for the mothers, it wasn't about headlines. It was about old wounds torn open, as raw as they'd been 10 years before. Caleb knew he had to face them. He owed them more than just updates. He owed them his presence. He started with Linda Carter, Lily May's mother. She still lived in the same small ranch house on the edge of town. Porch light burned out, curtains always drawn. When Caleb knocked, she opened the door slowly. Her face looked older than her years, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were still sharp. "You found it," she whispered. No greeting, no small talk, just the truth that had haunted her for a decade. "Yes, ma'am," Caleb replied quietly. "We did, but we didn't find them." Her hands shook as she motioned him inside. The living room was a shrine to Lily May's childhood. School photos lined the mantel. Her backpack hung from a chair. A half-finished quilt made from her daughter's old clothes was draped across the couch. Caleb sat in silence, letting Linda fill the quiet. "She told me once," Linda said after a long pause, "that sometimes the driver didn't take the main road. Said he liked the back way. Said it was faster." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She told you that before she disappeared?" 2 weeks before," Linda replied, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. Harold had always been trusted. Everyone liked him." Linda's voice trembled as she spoke. "I figured maybe he was just avoiding road work or something. But what if—" Her words broke off, her voice cracking. Caleb didn't try to finish her thought. He couldn't. After leaving Linda's house, Caleb made his way to the Johnsons. Their son Tyler had been among the missing. Tyler's father barely spoke, just sat on the porch, staring out at nothing with empty eyes. But Mrs. Johnson met Caleb at the door, her spirit undimmed by the years. "I told the police I saw men hanging around the school back then. Strangers," she said, her voice sharp. "They told me I was imagining things, that I was just being paranoid." Her eyes flashed. "Don't tell me now that I made it up, because I didn't." Caleb nodded, notebook open, Diesel lying quietly at his feet. "Do you remember what they looked like?" he asked. One was tall, had a scar on his cheek. "They watched the buses, watched the kids. I told Harold, too. He said he'd keep an eye out." The detail sent a chill through Caleb. A scarred man watching children, and Harold, the driver, had known about it. Later that night, Caleb spread his notes across the kitchen table. Diesel lay nearby, head on his paws, watching as Caleb tried to connect the pieces. The stories overlapped. Harold sometimes took alternate routes. Strangers had been seen near the school, and the children themselves had noticed. Then there was the note found on the bus. "We wait. She said she will come." Who was she? A teacher? A parent? Someone the children trusted? The question gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the image of the mothers at the vigil, their faces lit by candlelight. They had never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. Every year they pleaded for answers, and every year the silence only deepened. Now, with the bus discovered, their questions were sharper, more desperate. At the sheriff's office, Caleb sat through a meeting with state investigators. Charts covered the walls, maps were spread across the table. They discussed logistics, soil samples, search grids, DNA testing. But what lingered in Caleb's mind was the sense of unease. The evidence didn't point to outsiders. It pointed inward, toward the community itself. Someone had to know. One investigator said quietly, "You don't hide a bus in the woods without help." That night, Caleb returned to the bus site. The crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, markers glowing under the floodlights. He stepped inside the empty shell again, Diesel close behind. His flashlight caught on something he'd missed before. A child's shoe tucked beneath a seat. Small, white, with a faded cartoon character on the side. Caleb picked it up carefully as if it might break. He closed his eyes, picturing a little girl swinging her feet as the bus rolled down the road, humming to herself, never knowing it would be her last ride home. The weight of it nearly overwhelmed him. Diesel's sudden bark snapped him back. The dog was pawing at the rear emergency exit again, nose pressed to the rusted metal. Caleb knelt, running his light along the seams. This time, Caleb noticed scratches not just on the inside of the emergency exit, but on the outside as well, as if someone had forced the door open from both directions. His stomach twisted. The children hadn't just wandered off. Someone had taken them, one by one, through that very door. Standing in the moonlight, Caleb's breath came in ragged bursts. 10 years of silence had taught him a hard truth. Evil didn't always come from outsiders. Sometimes it wore a face everyone knew, and in this town, someone knew exactly what had happened. The woods were alive with sound, though most people wouldn't have noticed. The creak of branches, the steady chorus of crickets, the faint scurry of something small in the brush. But Caleb noticed everything. After a decade of unanswered questions, every snap of a twig set his nerves on edge. Diesel moved ahead, nose low to the ground, tail rigid with concentration. The dog had been restless since the bus was found, pulling at the leash as if the truth was just a little deeper in the trees. Caleb had learned to trust Diesel's instincts. He'd never been wrong before. "Find it, boy," Caleb whispered, loosening his grip as Diesel veered away from the marked crime scene and into the denser woods. Deputies had already swept the area, marking evidence with yellow flags, but Diesel ignored their trails, forging his own path between the trees and pulling Caleb further into the darkness. The ground was soft and damp beneath Caleb's boots, the air thick with the scent of wet pine and decay. After about 50 yards, Diesel stopped abruptly, circling a patch of ground. He began to dig, sending clumps of earth flying. Caleb knelt, shining his flashlight. The beam caught on something metallic, the edge of a rusted tin can. Nearby, a melted plastic wrapper lay half-buried, barely recognizable. A deputy who'd followed them let out a low whistle. "Looks like someone camped out here." But Caleb saw more. The ground showed signs of old fire pits, long cold. Broken glass glinted in the dirt. A scrap of fabric was snagged on a low branch. Not new, but not ancient either. Children had been here. Caleb's throat tightened as he leaned closer. He spotted something small, half buried in the soil. Brushing away the dirt, he lifted a tiny sneaker, no bigger than his palm. The sole was cracked, The laces frayed, but the cartoon character on the side was still visible. He recognized it immediately, a pair Tyler Johnson's mother had described, white with red trim. He swallowed hard, jaw clenched. He'd heard her mention those shoes every year at the vigils. She kept the other one in a box at home. This was its match. Diesel barked sharply, snapping Caleb out of his thoughts. The dog had moved again, nose pressed to the ground, tail now wagging with a new urgency. Caleb stood and followed as Diesel zigzagged toward a shallow creek bed, now dry from the summer heat. At the muddy edge, he spotted faint impressions, small footprints, not from boots or adult shoes, but the unmistakable marks of children, preserved where the mud had hardened long ago. "God," Caleb breathed, crouching low. His fingers hovered just above the prints, careful not to disturb them. They were tiny, clear as day. Children had crossed here. 10 years. The deputy behind him muttered. "How are those still here?" Caleb didn't answer. He wasn't one for miracles, but something about this place felt untouched, as if the forest itself had been guarding its secrets. Diesel barked again, drawing Caleb's attention to a mossy mound at the creek's edge. The dog dug furiously, dirt flying until the ground gave way with a hollow metallic clang. Caleb's pulse raced. He knelt beside Diesel, scraping away the soil with gloved hands. The tip of a metal hatch appeared, its surface corroded but unmistakable. A rusted handle jutted out from the earth. Caleb froze. This wasn't random. Someone had built this. Someone had hidden it. The deputy stepped back, cursing under his breath. "You think this is—" Caleb cut him off, mind already spinning. The bus had been left to rot. A decoy. A grave without bodies. But this was where the real story had played out. He pressed his palm to the cold metal. The hatch was sealed tight, years of earth packed over it, but he could feel the intent behind it. This wasn't just a storage space. It was a shelter. Diesel whined, pawing at the hatch, ears pinned back. Caleb's gut twisted. He didn't need Diesel's instincts to confirm what he already suspected. The children had been down there. By nightfall, the site was swarming with investigators. Floodlights turned the clearing into a stage, generators humming in the background. Shovels tore through the soil, peeling back layers until the hatch was fully revealed. Caleb stood off to the side, Diesel pressed against his leg, watching as gloved hands scraped away the last of the moss. When they finally pulled the handle, the hatch groaned, a scream of rust and age. A rush of stale, fetid air burst upward, carrying the unmistakable stench of something sealed away for too long. Caleb's flashlight pierced the darkness below. A ladder led down into a concrete bunker, its walls damp and stained. On the floor were rotting mattresses, children's chalk drawings smeared across the walls. Suns, houses, stick figures with smiling faces. The sight knocked the breath from his lungs. He gripped the edge of the hatch, knuckles white. The children hadn't just vanished. They had lived here. For how long? He couldn't bear to guess. Diesel growled, hackles raised as if sensing the ghosts that lingered in the room. Caleb forced himself down the ladder, boots clanging on the metal rungs. The air grew heavier with each step. On the floor he picked up a stuffed bear, its fur matted, one eye missing. He held it in his gloved hands, chest tight. This wasn't an accident. This was captivity. Then his light caught something else. Words scrawled across the wall in a child's handwriting, faded but still readable. "We wait for Mom." Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. Caleb's thoughts spun. The note found on the bus, the initials carved into the floorboards. And now, these words on the wall. The children hadn't been waiting for a rescue. They'd been waiting for someone in particular, someone they trusted enough to follow into the darkness. As Caleb climbed out of the bunker, his face pale in the harsh glare of the floodlights, he felt every deputy's eyes on him. No one said a word. They didn't have to. The truth was settling over them all. This wasn't the work of a nameless stranger passing through. This was personal. Someone from their own community had taken those children, and after a decade, that secret was finally surfacing. The bunker reeked of mold and rust, but beneath it was another scent, something harder to name. The stale air of lives lived in fear. Caleb's flashlight moved slowly across the concrete walls, his boots crunching over broken debris. Diesel lingered at the top of the hatch, whining, ears pinned back. The dog refused to go any further, and Caleb understood why. Chalk drawings covered the walls. Rainbows, stick figures, suns with smiling faces. The kind of art any second grader might make. But down here, in this airless underground room, they felt haunting. A desperate attempt to make a prison feel like home. On one wall, larger than the rest, was a row of names. 7 names written in uneven letters. Caleb read them one by one, each name cutting deeper. Lily, May, Tyler, Sophie, Aaron, Jacob, Mia, Daniel. The children had been here. His light landed on a corner where 3 mattresses were lined up, their fabric torn and stained from years of damp. Next to them sat a small box of toys, plastic soldiers, a Barbie missing its head, a deck of cards warped by moisture. Caleb knelt and picked up a crayon, the wrapper peeling, the tip worn to a nub. He closed his eyes, imagining the children huddled together, whispering in the dark, waiting for someone to tell them what would happen next, waiting for Mom. He'd seen desperation in other cases, but this was different. This was planned. Someone had intended for the children to survive down here, at least for a time. Back above ground, deputies snapped photos of the hatch and marked evidence. One shook his head. This isn't some drifter. Somebody knew about this place. Somebody local. Caleb didn't answer. He was still replaying the words on the wall. We wait for Mom. The handwriting was innocent, but the meaning was chilling. Who had they been waiting for? Later that night, Caleb sat in his cruiser at the edge of the woods. Diesel rested beside him, head in Caleb's lap, his warmth a small comfort. Caleb scribbled in his notebook, the words jagged and uneven in the dim glow. The pattern was coming into focus. The bus hadn't been a tomb. It was a distraction, the beginning of something much darker. The real story had played out underground. The children had survived for a time, waiting for someone who had promised to return. He replayed the mother's words in his mind. Linda's memory of Harold's secret shortcuts, Mrs. Johnson's warnings about strangers near the school. But what haunted him most was the trust the children must have felt. They wouldn't have followed just anyone into the woods. It had to be someone familiar, someone they believed would keep them safe. And then there was Harold Jenkins. His wallet left behind, his presence erased. Was he the perpetrator, or had he been caught up in it too? The next morning, Caleb returned to the bunker with Diesel. The air was cooler, less stifling without the floodlights, but the heaviness of the place lingered. This time Diesel climbed down the ladder, nose pressed to the concrete, tail flicking in short, anxious bursts. He stopped at the farthest corner, where the wall met the floor, and began to scratch, claws echoing in the empty space. Caleb knelt, brushing away years of dust and debris. Wedged between 2 loose blocks, he found another scrap of paper. He pulled it out carefully, the edges brittle with age. It was lined, torn from a school notebook. In a child's shaky handwriting, 3 words were scrawled, "She never came." Caleb's breath caught. His throat tightened as he slipped the note into an evidence bag. The children had waited, days, maybe weeks, believing someone would come for them. When that hope faded, their world must have collapsed. He leaned against the damp wall, chest aching. This wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal. Whoever had done this hadn't relied on force alone. They'd twisted trust, turned love into a weapon. Diesel whimpered, pressing his nose into Caleb's hand. Caleb stroked the dog's fur, lost in thought. Outside, the media storm had erupted. Headlines blared across the country. Missing school bus, found after 10 years. Children's bunker, discovered in Tennessee woods. Reporters demanded answers, but the sheriff's office kept silent. Families were shielded from the cameras, but the pain was written on their faces. At the vigil that night, Linda Carter gripped Caleb's arm, her eyes fierce. "You said you'd bring her home." "You promised me that 10 years ago." Caleb swallowed hard. "I know I failed you, but I swear I won't stop until we have the truth." Her voice broke, but her grip stayed firm. "Somebody promised them, Caleb. Somebody they trusted. Find out who it was." Back at his kitchen table, Caleb spread out every piece of evidence. Photos of the bus, drawings from the bunker, the shoe, the notes, the names on the wall. Diesel lay nearby, eyes half closed, but his body tense, as if even in sleep he could feel the weight pressing down on his partner. All the evidence pointed in one direction: betrayal. The children hadn't been taken by outsiders, but by someone deeply woven into the life of the town. A neighbor, a teacher, a trusted adult, someone who could smile in church on Sunday and disappear with 7 children on Monday. Caleb stared at the words again. "We wait for Mom. She never came." The implications were devastating. Was it possible one of the mothers was involved? Or had someone posed as a protector, using trust as a weapon? The thought made his stomach churn. Diesel suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Caleb followed the dog's gaze to the window. The night outside was still, the street empty, but a chill crept up Caleb's spine. He couldn't shake the sense that someone out there knew he was getting close, someone who had kept their secret buried for 10 years and wasn't ready for it to come to light. Caleb leaned back, exhaling slowly, his resolve hardening. The children's voices might have been silenced, but their whispers lingered. In the walls, in the notes, in the lives they'd left behind. And Caleb Morris, with Diesel at his side, was determined to follow those whispers, no matter how close to home they led. Since the bunker's discovery, the town hadn't slept. Rumors spread through diners, church pews, and gas stations. Everyone had a theory, but beneath it all was a gnawing fear. The truth wasn't somewhere far away, it was here, rooted in their own backyards. Caleb felt it with every step down Main Street. Heads turned, conversations stopped. People wanted answers. But more than that, they wanted to believe the monster wasn't one of their own. Caleb couldn't give them that, not yet. Diesel stayed close, his steady presence a comfort. At the sheriff's office, Caleb dug through boxes of old files. Interviews, faded photos, handwritten notes. He kept circling back to one name, Harold Jenkins, the bus driver. On paper, Harold was the obvious suspect. He was last seen with the children, his wallet left behind on the bus. But something didn't add up. Harold's reputation was spotless. No debts, no criminal record, no history of strange behavior. For years, parents had trusted him with their kids. Then Caleb noticed a detail he'd missed before. A letter tucked into the corner of the file. It was from Harold's wife, written weeks after the disappearance. In it, she pleaded with the sheriff to consider another possibility. Harold had been deceived. He was too trusting, she wrote. If someone told him the children needed to be taken somewhere safe, he would have believed them. That idea gnawed at Caleb as he drove back to the woods. The bunker was still under guard, evidence teams working around the clock. Diesel pulled at the leash, nose twitching, leading Caleb not to the hatch, but along a faint trail behind it. They followed the winding path until Caleb stopped short. Half buried in the dirt was a cracked, faded plastic name tag. He brushed away the soil and read the name, M. Harper, substitute teacher. The sight hit him like a blow. He remembered her now, Melissa Harper. She'd filled in at the elementary school that year, covering a maternity leave. She wasn't from the area, but she'd blended in quickly. Young, friendly, the kind of teacher kids adored. She always lingered at the bus stop, waving until the bus disappeared down the road. And when the bus vanished, so did she. Everyone had assumed she'd simply moved on after her contract ended. No one had ever linked her disappearance to the case, until now. Caleb's hands shook as he held the name tag. Diesel barked, sharp and insistent, as if to confirm what they'd found. She was the mom, Caleb whispered. The one they'd been waiting for. The realization made his stomach twist. Melissa Harper hadn't been a stranger to those children. She was someone they trusted. Someone who smiled at them every morning, tied their shoes, praised their drawings. She hadn't needed to frighten them into the woods. They would have followed her without question. Caleb stared into the trees, a wave of anger and sorrow rising in his chest. What betrayal could be worse than this, turning trust and affection into a trap? The days that followed blurred together. Interviews, evidence reviews, calls to federal agents. A deeper background check revealed Melissa Harper wasn't even her real name. She'd used different identities in several states, leaving behind a string of jobs at schools and daycares, each ending abruptly. Her motive was still unclear. Some believed it was trafficking, others thought it was a twisted obsession. But for the families, the reason mattered less than the answer to who. The mask had finally been pulled away. They knew who had led their children into the darkness. On Sunday evening, the town gathered at the bus stop again. The vigil felt different this time. The grief was still there, but now it was edged with anger, the sting of betrayal. Mothers held candles, fathers clutched old photographs, but their tears were mixed with outrage. Caleb stood among them, Diesel pressed close to his side. When Linda Carter met his eyes, she didn't need to say a word. Her look said it all. You found her. You gave us the truth, even if it hurt. He nodded, his throat tight, unable to speak. Later, after the candles had burned down, Caleb walked back to his cruiser. He paused at the memorial, where teddy bears slumped in the grass and faded photos still clung to the past. He knelt and straightened Lily Mae's picture, brushing away the dirt. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have seen it sooner. But I promise you, she won't disappear again. Diesel whined softly, pressing his head into Caleb's hand. For the first time in 10 years, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not peace, He knew that would never come, but a sense of resolve. The children's voices left behind in chalk drawings and carved initials had finally been heard. The town would heal slowly, scar tissue forming over old wounds, but now they had a name, a face, and a truth to hold on to. And Caleb Morris, with Diesel at his side, knew his promise still stood. He would carry the weight of this case for as long as it took. Thank you for following this story. Do you think betrayal hurts more when it comes from a stranger or from someone we trust?